Alright, Postal 3 and Watch underscore dogs. Two really rather negative reviews in a row, so let's play something I like. And it's time for my first review in 1080p. I've chosen an absolute belter for it. Yeah, look at that fucking 1080p campfire. Looks great if you ask me. It's Shovel Knight, a side-scrolling 2D platformer released earlier this year by Yacht Club Games. This is their first title, and it was funded a couple of times over by Kickstarter, achieving all of its stretch goals, some of which are still not available. I'm going to preface this review by saying I may like this game a bit too much. It's very obviously inspired by old 8-bit platformers, particularly Mega Man. Even if, like me, you never really cared that much about them, it has more than enough identity and charm to stand on its own. Plus it has quite a few modern conveniences and a more modern design philosophy as well. The way one of the developers put it was, instead of emulating the NES exactly, we would create a rose-tinted view of an 8-bit game. Shovel Knight, named in my case Gertrude, and Shield Knight were great heroes roaming the land. This was until Shield Knight was lost at the Tower of Fate due to a cursed amulet. Shovel Knight is knocked out, and when he awakes, Shield Knight is gone and the tower is sealed. Shovel Knight goes into a life of putting his shovel to actual practical use. It seems he was also the only other heroic presence knocking about, because at this point the Order of No Quarter, led by the evil Enchantress, seized the land. And when the Tower of Fate unseals, Shovel Knight comes out of retirement and sets off for it. And with that, we begin the first stage, the Plains of Passage. It's your typical green field style opening stage, introducing us to Shovel Knight's moveset, and most of the recurring stage elements we'll see throughout the game, near enough one after the other. Breakable blocks, breakable walls, hidden areas via those breakable walls, typically filled with extra cash and sometimes music sheets to collect, bubbles to bounce off of, a mid-level mini-boss, piles of debris to pick up for extra cash, instant death spikes, bottomless pits, and great music done by Jake Kaufman. The level is obviously pretty easy, and it gives us ample room to experiment with Shovel Knight's moveset. The level itself doesn't demand much competency outside of those hidden rooms, which actually require a degree of gauging jumps. It's not really too much of a problem regardless, because Shovel Knight controls brilliantly. I never feel the game's at fault when I do miss a jump due to a flexible amount of air control and a sensible speed. His basic attack I'm not too fond of. Its range is uncomfortably close for most of the faster enemies. It does grant a slight moment of invincibility so as to make it actually viable, but I tend to save the basic slash as a last resort. And besides, it's outclassed entirely by the shovel drop, which is Pogo digging through enemies with his shovel blade. Bouncing on enemies is both satisfying and surprisingly practical. Very few enemies actually force you into using other options to approach them. I never got tired of the shovel drop. The controls work great with the levels. Shovel Knight has a sense of weight and momentum that isn't overbearing. His movement speed gives you ample time to arrange and make jumps without having to stop and position yourself. And you can maintain a pretty good flow through the levels because of this. But it does pay to hold up and take stock on occasion. It creates a game that has challenge but never feels unfair or awkward to approach. That and the shovel feels exactly as powerful and enjoyable to use as it should. And at the end of the Plains of Passage, we run into Shovel Knight's former ally, the Black Knight. He will not let Shovel Knight pass, standing in defense of the Enchantress. So, it's our first boss fight. And of course it's a rival fight, because rival fights done right are the best shit. And despite the fact that it's the first boss and almost trivial compared to what's to come, and despite having beaten the game before recording this review, he nearly fucking kills me. Anyway, he is a good first boss. Not only a really fun fight, but a good closer to what is in a way the tutorial stage. By being something of a mirror boss, he pretty much retreads all the moves you've started using over the course of the stage. One thing the game hasn't gone over yet is that you can actually reflect projectiles, so you have a couple of counters to the only move he possesses that you don't have some form of. Shovel Knight out-shovels Black Knight, and he scarpers. With the first level cleared, we're dropped onto the world map. Further stages are unlocked in sets of 2 or 3 each, and you can tackle those in any order you want. Clearing the set opens up a further chunk of the world map and the next lot of stages. It's a straight shot to the Tower of Fate, and the only thing standing in Shovel Knight's way is the Order of No Quarter. Well, actually, if you look at the stage locations on the map, then it seems they aren't actually in our way whatsoever. In fact, Shovel Knight really is going out of his way to get to the buggers, going deep underground, far underwater, hopping onto flying machines. But you know what, sorta, if you're taking on a Knight's Order, you may as well be thorough. Right after the Plains of Passage, we need to pass through the town, and this will be a stop-off point for quite a lot of the game. Firstly, we can speak with passers-by to get tips. In this area, we can use meal tickets, either bought or earned at certain points throughout the game, to upgrade our health bar, by eating delicious pixelated meals. And you know what? I only saw one repeat dish throughout my playthrough. From this lady, we can upgrade our magic meter, and that magic meter fuels items we get from this bloke. He sells relics, basically additional weapons and utilities that will help us throughout the game. We can hear puns from this guy. There are a ton of these. Why are they here? I don't know. I don't really care either. I'm just glad they're there. Break open this wall and we can find a surprisingly fun little mini-game. It's a pretty simple affair. Just gotta bounce those potions at the bumpers for points. Helps with your timing, I suppose. And the music is pretty decent. And it gets us some more dosh. And yet another music sheet. And those music sheets go to the bard. If you don't care about listening to the music, you know, because you're some kind of pleb, it's no problem. It's still worth the trouble because he pays out decently for each music sheet. This bard is fucking loaded. Also, he makes puns. And jokes about Kickstarter in at least one of them. Lastly, there's this fella. He sells truffle chalices. Leaving town and heading out to this pond lets us fill them with magical ichor from the Truffle King. Yeah, that's a thing you can do. Once you buy a chalice or two off of him, all ichor refills are free. You don't even need to watch the dance again. There are 3 varieties of ichor to choose from. The red gives us a complete health and magic refill, blue allows us 10 seconds of invulnerability, and yellow attracts all nearby treasures towards us. I typically only find red to be useful. We have alternate means to gain invulnerability, and I'm patient enough to just collect dosh. Also on the world map are a small selection of bonus stages that depend on having a certain relic to attempt. Having that relic opens up a small obstacle course that provides extra dosh and more music sheets. Roaming the map at certain points are a handful of mini-stages for yet even more dosh. And on occasion, one of the 3 bosses added by Kickstarter backers who paid for the Director for a Day perk. Those who paid in got to add their own boss fight into the game. I bring them up now because they're relatively simple boss fights. That said, they are a nice inclusion to the game. They give Shovel Knight a bit of dialogue and some fun characters to bounce off of. Literally when the boss fight actually starts. Nearing the final part of the game, we unlock an entirely optional stage, the Hall of Champions. We have to pay for entry because the Hall of Champions has to keep out the common riffraff and pure Philistines. However, once inside, we're trapped with some other poor suckered sods. And over 100 pixelated paintings of various Kickstarter backers adorn the walls. It's a bit of a slow level, based around taking out ghosts by bouncing orbs of light at them. All said, it's more of a showcase for the backers than an actually challenging stage. But that's what it seems to be intended as. That said, the boss is no pushover. We light the place up floor by floor. Lifting the doors and allowing us to escape. We get outside and are chided for paying into something before we know the details. That's at least 2 jokes about Kickstarter. I don't really think too much into that. I just find it funny that we're in a game that proves that good things can actually come from Kickstarter projects. We can also run into Black Knight on the world map once more, having a slightly more difficult rematch. Further into the game we come across the armor outpost, with the Aerial Anvil, an airship at which we can acquire upgrades to our shovel and buy some alternate armors. Of the 3 available shovel upgrades, I only consider one that worthwhile. The Drop Spark. It changes our basic attack so that when we're at full health it causes a shockwave to run along the ground ahead of us. It saves on magic a little bit. Another unlocks a charge attack that takes up some time to use, and it cripples Shovel Knight's mobility when using it. And lastly, the ability to dig up those mounts in one hit. Of the available armors we can choose, one reduces knockback, but we lose a degree of traction. I never had that much of an issue with knockback to begin with, so I can leave on that one. Another halves money lost on death, and one is gold. That's it, it's gold, it makes us do flips and shit when we jump. Aside from that, it's basically identical to the blue armor. We have a further armor that gives us a far greater magic pool, at the cost of taking greater damage from all sources. Magic is pretty plentiful in the game anyway, so I never found it too handy. Lastly, there's my favourite, and the only one I consider a genuine out-and-out upgrade, the Dynamo Plate. It completely invalidates actually charging charge attacks. Performing 2 consecutive shovel drops actually gives you a hell charge attack, while also allowing you to maintain Shovel Knight's basic speed. I didn't need any more reason to shovel drop everything, but this game seems to know me. Charge attacks lets us destroy enemies way faster, and more importantly make children sad. Yeah, fuck you, kid. There's also this here clothing shop, where we can buy clothes for these lot. Doing so unlocks the 4th and final Director for a Day boss fight. Mr. Hat, and he knows just how great the armor is. There are 9 stages throughout Shovel Knight's journey to the Tower of Fate, with a final 3 stages there to wrap it up. We have the Plains of Passage, Pridemore Keep, Iron Whale, Explodatorium, the Lost City, Stranded Ship, Clockwork Tower, and the Flying Machine. At Pridemore Keep we're introduced to a couple more recurring elements, in the form of Knight and Mage enemies. Knights and Mages take new forms depending on stage, so they vary throughout the game. Knights are one of the buggers who can actually block attacks both from the side and from above, so you have to vary between shovel drops and regular slashes to knock them down. They can become a bit of a bore to fight, as the extra abilities they get rarely change how you should approach them. Plus they are the hardiest regular enemies by far, being able to take about 5 hits where most enemies would take 2. Combine that with the ability to block, and they can be a bit slow. Luckily they're used sparingly throughout the stages. Mage enemies feel more like obstacles than enemies, and their forms range from tricky bastards to useless bastards, depending on the projectile their form has. After the first stage, another new element is introduced. The checkpoints can now be broken for extra money, but obviously they stop functioning as checkpoints in this instance. It introduces a bit more risk and reward to the game, but the stages already pay out a fair amount, so I don't really feel the need. It's just kind of a drop in the bucket at that point. So despite the number of recurring elements and enemies, the stages remain fresh and maintain their own sense of identity by having markedly different themes. Each also brings about new, unique stage gimmicks and setting appropriate enemies to keep things interesting. Pridemore Keep is a castle stage, filled with boiling oil and collapsing chandeliers. Magical tomes which open up temporary platforms. The Lich Yard is, well, a Lich Yard. It's all about ghosts and headstones to bounce off of. The blackout sections in this stage are one of the few challenges in this game I'm not too big on. First time around they're just kind of plodding, and second time around they're slightly less plodding. Iron Whale is an underwater stage. We don't have an oxygen meter to worry about, but now Shovel Knight rockets up when he jumps before slowly coming back down. And, oh yeah, they put spikes on the ceiling. Be careful gauging your jumps. It also has crabs. After knocking them out, you can launch their shells through blocks and enemies alike. Explodatorium has flame-spewing walkways and enemies constantly dropping explosives from above. The Lost City follows up on Explodatorium's fire with lava. Not to worry though, we have some weird goo that neutralizes the lava and makes it bouncy for a bit. Stranded Ship is a snow level, so you already know that there are slippery surfaces. And there's this weird floaty thing. You can ram enemies with it, which is exactly what you want to do, trust me. Next up is the Clockwork Tower, Factory Stage. It's all about conveyors and exploding clockwork mice. It's all moving parts and little flying robot bastards. Last up is the Flying Machine. This stage is heavy on wind gimmicks and bottomless pits. The wind gimmicks are okay the first time around, but 1 or 2 rooms really break the pace, and they can get to be a slog on repeat playthroughs. It doesn't last too long, however. Even at its worst, Shovel Knight is still a fun game, and this list obviously doesn't give away each unique thing to each stage. This is just a basic summation of each level. There's far more to each of them than what I just went over. Most of the stages also have a mid-level mini-boss, but only a couple really stand out much at all. They are introduced with little fanfare and they tend to go out that way as well. I can't name one stage I dislike. Each of them make you use your moveset in new ways and each has great music. There are some tracks that are more memorable than others for sure, but there isn't a missed beat amongst them. Stranded Ship's track is a relatively melancholy tune, but it still maintains a sense of excitement and drive, compared to Flying Machine's theme, which is one of the most upbeat stage tracks I've ever heard. I've been listening to the soundtrack while writing and editing this, and I've still yet to tire of it. Aiding us through the stages are those relics I mentioned. They range from kinda meh to fucking fantastic. While we can get a few relics from the shop in town, most of them are in hidden rooms throughout each stage. Nearly every level brings a new toy to play with if you look for it, and with that, a room to test it in. Luckily the hidden rooms with a relic salesman in them tend to be the easiest ones to find. First up we have the Flare. It's your standard projectile, doesn't cost too much to use and remains practical throughout the game. The Phase Locket grants a second or two of invulnerability at will. It doesn't cost too dearly so it can be spammed for dear life. This is why I prefer the instant refill Ichor to the invulnerability one. The Fishing Rod. Littered throughout the stage is a little fishing spots where we can get a fish worth some dosh. Or once in a while an Ichor refill. The Throwing Anchor grants us an angled attack, and ignores the level geometry, allowing us to hit enemies we couldn't otherwise attack. The Alchemy Coin makes enemies drop more loot, and I found out after recording the game it supposedly does more damage on bosses. The Chaos Orb is a bouncy projectile that just wrecks whatever it touches, because it bounces through them multiple times. The Mobile Gear is more utility than anything, but I find it only helps a small amount of times. It allows you to ride over spikes and grants a little extra jumping height. It can also act as a weapon. The Warhorn is a very damaging area of effect weapon that costs a ton of magic. I rarely use it, except to play a Warhorn duet with this bloke. The Dust Knuckles allow us to glide through breakable blocks and through breakable enemies, and the Propeller Dagger lets us genuinely glide. And being a blade, it also occasionally stabs things. So you do build up a pretty decent arsenal of abilities, and are pretty well equipped to deal with whatever threat the game throws at you. Relics are the best kind of upgrades. They are entirely optional, never required to beat the game or progress, but they make things a hell of a lot easier, and most importantly, they're incredibly fun to use. A nice little touch is the button prompt to activate your relics. Up plus attack. It's suitably archaic. A more practical option exists that moves relics to their own button, but where's the fun in that? Quite a few of the relics themselves also have nice little secondary features. The Fishing Rod actually doubles as a weapon, and it does as much damage as a charge attack. Plus it can be used to pick up gold dropped in tricky places. The Dust Knuckles ignore enemy shields, so those night enemies, sod 'em, you can just punch right through. The Alchemy Coin in a few sections actually helps you with trick floors. This unintended usefulness extends in the oddest ways. You know that gold armor I talked about? It kinda helps for keeping track of Shovel Knight on those blackout segments. The relics give you a lot of extra options to make use of, and they help us through the stages quite handily. And naturally, each stage ends with a boss fight. Each of the boss fights build on their respective level gimmicks, while bringing something new to the table, acting as final exams to each stage. We have King Knight, Spectre Knight, Treasure Knight, Plague Knight, Mole Knight, Polar Knight, Tinker Knight, and lastly, Propeller Knight. I realise you hate the word knight at this point. Much like the stages, they each get their own musical track, because not only is the music bloody great, but there's lots of it. Each boss also gets a nice bit of pre-fight banter. It's kept quite hammy and light-hearted, and delivered via text boxes with bleeps for voices, each character having their own little sort of bleep standing in for their voice. The dialogues are amusing and they give the bosses far more personality in only a few short sentences than Ubisoft can deliver with an entire game of characterization. Plus, Shovel Knight is a likeable little bugger, always tries to avoid a fight if possible, before inevitably having to wreck someone's day. He even forgives people who attack him at the slightest sign of them backing down. I'll give you another example completely out of left field before I get back to boss fights. Think of the most likeable protagonist you know. Imagine that this protagonist has found a sad anthropomorphic frog living in a village under attack by an evil enchantress. It's a bizarre scenario, I know. Would that protagonist take the time out of his or her day to stop and tell truly dreadful puns to that sad frog in a genuine attempt to cheer them up? Because I honestly doubt they would. But Shovel Knight would. Shovel Knight in my case did. Just reading these really silly little puns. They don't even make any goddamn sense outside the context of this game, but they're fucking great. I mean, how many games have shit like this? One criticism I do have is that while the stage difficulty curves upwards mostly sensibly, the difficulty of bosses is a little bit more all over the place. Spectre Knight is quite an early boss and probably one of my favourites. On my first run through of the game, he did give me a pretty fair challenge. It could be down to me still learning the game, because on later playthroughs I find him pretty easy to handle. I'd rank Plague Knight as the boss I had the most trouble with, due to how bloody all over the place he is, and he's a boss in the middle of the game. I'm comparing him to Propeller Knight and Tinker Knight, both of whom may be the very last bosses you'll face before entering the endgame, and both of whom are very easy when compared to Plague Knight due to their very predictable and easily dodged patterns. Tinker Knight is probably the easiest boss in the game, which is funny considering he is one of the only two-stage boss fights. His first stage is obviously a joke, especially considering hitting him with the mobile gear is a one-hit kill. His second stage only fares so much better, because there is a pattern you can follow that ensures you'll beat him with absolutely no risk of failure. It's kind of fitting that his stage is a clockwork tower. Polar Knight is one of the later bosses, and he actually ups the challenge quite well. He has a hard counter to shovel drops, and is one of the few bosses to have instant kills due to him opening up spike pits in his arena. The bosses are generally enjoyable, but their difficulty is a little inconsistent. Between each stage we get a moment of calm with the campfire scene. Some of these have a dream sequence where we can catch a falling shield knight whilst under attack from all sides, and also earn some dream money, which exchanges pretty well into actual tangible money. These scenes do tail end the stages nicely. They give a good feeling of closure to each level, and the following scene where Shovel Knight wakes up and has to exit the stage to the right, it ties the adventure together quite nicely, and it gives a good sense of progress and it puts the adventure in context. The difficulty is pretty noteworthy in and of itself. Considering it's a throwback game to titles such as Mega Man, the difficulty is kinda lax. For one thing, you have no set amount of lives when attempting stages. You have infinite retries, and on death you just drop some cash that can be recovered should you make it back to that point of the level. That's if it hasn't floated somewhere awkward. Checkpoints are plentiful, and Shovel Knight not only has a decent amount of health throughout the game, but health items are absolutely plentiful. There is always a complete health refill after mini-bosses, and at the pre-boss checkpoint. Not to mention that at any time you can have 2 chalices giving you a complete refill whenever you want. Those relics use up your magic bar, sure, but items to refill magic are even more common than health items. Not to mention you can increase your maximum magic far cheaper than your health, and unlike health where you have to get meal tickets after certain points in the game, you can top up your magic as long as you have the money necessary. And you can repeat stages to grind cash. That said, you never need to grind money, which is kind of a blessing. The amount of cash you get just for doing levels with a degree of competency, and hitting as many hidden rooms as you can, means you can generally buy every new relic and upgrade as they're introduced, so Shovel Knight never really falls behind. The level design and the gimmicks also tie into the difficulty. Every single stage gimmick is introduced in a safe area, giving the player time to familiarise themselves with what it is and how it operates. You are never made to learn anything under any kind of pressure. It's an understandable design choice, but it removes some tension, and it makes the stages feel a little mechanical. When introduced to a new gimmick, you will typically have 2 or 3 safe instances of it where you're in very little danger at all. Only the wind gimmick really drops you anywhere close to danger in its introduction. Enemies can blink away at your health, but you always near enough have ample supplies to beat or even just bypass them with little cost. The Dynamo Plate also gives me very easy access to charge attacks without slowing me down or lending any real drawback. Shovel Knight is an incredibly durable character so long as he isn't thrown against spikes, pits or lava, and even then the phase locket lets him ignore spikes. That said, once you beat the game you do unlock a New Game Plus mode that is a definite step up in difficulty. You do start the game with your upgraded health and magic, plus you carry over all of your earned relics, but now you're going to need them. You now take double damage, and all but a handful of the available health items remain. Now those complete health refills before boss fights? How incredibly rude. So now those chalices are even more handy to have. Oh, by the by, if you use one of them and die, they don't refill, and you're going a lot further back on death because most of the checkpoints are gone. New Game Plus feels a lot closer to the games it's emulating, and is a refreshing step up in challenge from your first time around. Now those relics and bonus armors don't serve to make Shovel Knight a destructive force to be reckoned with, now you need to make good use of them to make progress. This was somewhat hampered by the fact I decided to use the ornate plate armor throughout my New Game Plus run. I had to make it flashy, you know? This game is by no stretch easy, but it's a far cry from platforming hell. I still died a fair number of times on my playthrough of the game, but good design keeps it from ever feeling cheap. Plentiful checkpoints also mean you never really lose too much progress on any given level either. All that said, fuck these little flying bastards. These are the only enemies in the game I out and out hate. They just seem to be able to approach you at exactly the most awkward position, and they're put on screens where they cause the most fucking damage. Just sod them. Sod those little flying fluffy pricks. After clearing the final 3 stages, the Tower of Fate opens up. The overworld music shifts, and we are at the endgame. What follows are 3 stages, bringing back enemies and gimmicks from before, and remixing them in what is ultimately a quite short marathon stage. The Tower of Fate is split into 3 segments: the entrance, the ascent, and the question mark, 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 question mark. Nearing the end of the entrance level we run into Black Knight, turning down an offer to join the Enchantress, and revealing not all is as it seems. She effortlessly blasts him with some purple energy shit that allows him to sprout wings, and more importantly give him a third and final rival battle. First off, let's reflect his purple energy. Ah, fuck, he's learned. Oh fuck, he really has learned. It's no Plague Knight, it's no Polar Knight, but he's definitely tougher. After defeating Black Knight, Shovel Knight comes to the realization that Shield Knight is the Enchantress, cursed by the amulet, and Black Knight was just trying to protect her. And with that, he continues deeper into the tower. And what follows is the Ascent. Its more gimmicks reintroduced in a more difficult way. Like all good final stages, it's the toughest bugger going. The Tower of Fate does have one pretty cool move though. These ninja-type enemies are actually made by one of the director for a day people, so they design one of the final stage enemies. That's pretty nice, I suppose. That said, they're not terribly unique enemies. The sword guys will charge you, and the archers are somewhat like powered-up mages, and they're used pretty commonly throughout the level, but the gimmicks are pretty much all just stuff that's been used throughout the game beforehand. It doesn't bring anything new to the table. It's a good thing that the Order of No Quarter just nicked ideas from this bloody tower, as it prepared me pretty well to tackle it. Oh hey, speaking of bringing something new to the table. Well, shit. Time for a boss rush. I'd say we ruin dinner, but it's more like we eat their dinner. They throw food at us between every fight. Plenty of magic refills too. Except on New Game Plus, where you only get refills every other fight. Which makes this part insanely difficult for me. And if you die, it's right back to the start of the fight. Best of luck! Yeah, get fucked, Plague Knight. So, after wrecking the entire order one after the other, we have the choice whether or not to pull them all back up onto the table. Ah, come on then, fuckers. All's forgiven. One last chat with each of them. A few of them are half-decent blokes, it seems. And we're off deeper into the tower. After one last brief platforming segment, we find the Enchantress. Shovel Knight tries to talk Shield Knight out of her, and it doesn't precisely work. So, we have our final showdown. Her boss fight's a tense one, all about the platform you're standing on, and more importantly the bottomless pit beneath it. And the Enchantress not only fires off projectiles, but she breaks and rebuilds the stage around you. This is one of my favourite fights throughout the whole game. Manipulating a boss's attacks to build the stage to make sure you don't fall is a really great little idea. Defeating her frees Shield Knight from the curse. And just like in the dream sequences, we catch her. Or we can choose not to. Doesn't actually make any difference. Not all is right yet. The amulet is smashed, the curse within it is spreading, and the Enchantress is far from done. Shield Knight and Shovel Knight team up for the second final encounter. That first one was just me getting ahead of myself. This fight is actually easier than the first stage, but it does showcase just why the two were a great team. They both knew the sheer power of the shovel drop. The Enchantress is beaten once again, but the tower is still collapsing, and in her death throes, Shovel Knight is hit with a powerful blast from the Enchantress. Black Knight turns up just in time to rescue him, as Shield Knight covers their retreat. We cut to outside, and the tower collapses. We get epilogues for all those bosses and bit NPCs we've seen throughout the game. Some get pretty happy endings, all things considered. Some, not quite so much. Either way, everything is wrapped up nice and neat to a wonderful medley of remixed stage tracks. It brings a genuine smile to my dead face. We find that Black Knight successfully got Shovel Knight out of harm's way, and the credits roll. Shovel Knight really is a great game. I love it. It makes me happy just playing it. It's simple, light-hearted fun. And I guess it's pretty obvious to say that I recommend Shovel Knight, as it is probably my favourite game of this year so far. As for the length of the game versus its price tag, this was my second run of the game. I collected all the relics, all the armors, all the upgrades. I did miss a few music sheets though, and it clocked in at just under 5 hours. It costs just over 10 quid. That's pretty fucking good. It's a game that clearly had a lot of care and attention put into it. It handles perfectly, offers a good level of challenge, and on New Game Plus, an even tougher one. The bosses and their boss fights are a lot of fun, and there are so many little touches here and there that are a joy to seek out. Even if, like me, you don't really care for 8-bit platformers, Shovel Knight has enough going for it that it stands as a great game independent of its influences. Well, I was to Snakerer. I was going to do Zombie U this month, but well, I couldn't deal with that much Ubisoft twice in a row. So, perhaps next time. I hope you enjoyed this review. And, yeah, fucking Shovel Knight is the shit, man. Seriously, I've left, like, loads of credits in here. Have you, like, considered it yet? At least fucking look up the soundtrack. Do it. Come on. This part isn't even scripted, I just threw it in here at the last second of editing. So, yeah. See you next time, fuckers.